Welcome to Lived in Christianity, a podcast about exploring what it means to be a Christian in the modern world.
I'm Savannah, and this is my husband, Emmanuel. We have a whole episode introducing who we are and what this podcast is about, so go check that out if you're interested.
In the meantime, does the church hate the mentally ill?
Well, that's what we're going to talk about!
No, we're talking about mental health and stigma it carries in the church. Because unfortunately, sometimes it does. Sometimes it does.
Often. Maybe less than it used to, but it does.
Often enough that we all probably know people who have had a story.
Yeah. And we have some, which we'll talk about a little bit. But to us, having a lived-in faith, which is what this podcast is about, means that our faith comes with us in every area of life. And so that very much includes our mental well-being or lack thereof. Mental health is a huge part of us as holistic people, encompassing our thoughts and emotions, interactions with others, our ability to interact with faith, and a whole lot of other things.
Yeah, because if you're sad all the time,
yeah,
it can be hard to do the things that you would normally do as a Christian, like read your Bible and pray. You can lose motivation to do all of those things.
Or if you have trauma related to religion. Difficult.
You went there so quickly. We both have it, though. We both have it.
So we're not going to spend this episode telling anyone how to fix their mental health.
No, go to therapy.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we will a little bit.
It's us telling you to go to therapy.
This is more about exposing the problem of stigma.
Raising awareness.
Yeah. And that's a good first step for the church as a community to deal with it.
And if you've ever had a story where you're like, wow, I was like, hi, sometimes I feel sad, and someone at the church gave you a lecture about it, you should post in the comments and tell us the story.
Yeah.
Because I want to know.
Me too.
Yeah. But, and so we had some data that we threw in here about like mental illness prevalence in the church because a lot of times people can, my brain's doing 8 things. If you're someone who goes to church every morning and you meet and talk to people there and you're like stay after service and you schmooze and chat, there's just always, we are those people. And also we see lots of other people who do that. It can be easy to be like, well, they seem great. And it can be easy to pretend to be great, but that doesn't mean that you are great. And so it can hide. So you see that, well, my church doesn't have that problem. I don't know anybody who has that problem. It might just be that you aren't interacting with people enough.
Yeah, so some surveys that we found, which we'll link, say that upwards of 95% of church leaders report recognizing mental illness within their church congregations. And about 40% of these leaders themselves also said that they themselves struggled with their mental illness.
Yeah. And you might think that the clergy are well equipped to handle those things, like the pastors or priests or whoever, but oftentimes like, it's not necessarily part of their schooling.
Right.
Or part of their mentoring, or they might not be equipped at all. In fact, they might have like things.
Be the worst off.
They might be the least likely to like be able to help. Some of them are great. I've met, pastors who are really good at that, and I've also met pastors who are not really.
I'm also just thinking of, I mean, this isn't a episode about pastors specifically, but I am thinking about pastors specifically for a second in that they might be the least equipped to help themselves or to get help because there can be a lot of shame around being a leader in general, but especially being a person whose job is to be a man or woman of God. There can be a lot of shame.
Yeah. Unfortunately. And then the other statistic we had here to start off is that researchers have found that 25% of people struggling with mental illness turn to clergy first. So even though they might be not always the best equipped, 1 out of every 4 people goes there first, which is an awesome opportunity for ministry. If you're a church leader and you're like, I'm not always equipped, you should get equipped, baby. Go get equipped. Take a class. They have that. They have those.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the stigma. There's a common view in the church that seeking professional help is a sign of spiritual weakness. So when I'm saying professional help there, I'm referring to counselors, and therapists specifically, because I don't think anyone would say that it's a sign of spiritual weakness to ask your pastor for help. They might say that to a pastor, but I don't think they'd say that to the average person. Well, the average person?
A regular,
non-leader of the church. But yeah, it can be seen as a sign of spiritual weakness, as a sign of, oh, you just didn't pray enough, oh, you just didn't have enough faith. You should have kept reading your Bible. You should have kept doing those things.
You have
should
everything
have
you
fasted
need.
more.
Why are you unhappy?
Yeah.
Many Christians also don't trust counselors.
Mm-hmm.
So this place called Simpson, we wrote it down like I remember what it was. I don't remember what that is.
Troubled Minds. Look,
Troubled Minds. Yeah,
we're about mental illness in the
it's
church.
in the show notes.
Simpson was a person.
Cite your sources, and there it is. But Simpson, the author. I thought it was an organization.
No.
Oops. Records their views of psychology as inherently and irredeemably secular. So Christians think that psychology is just a non-church, non-Christian, anti-Christian, or even like of the devil.
Right.
I could hear that.
I've heard saying psychology that secular therapists will almost like brainwash you and teach you to get help away from God, and like won't help you in your relationship with God, but will kind of steer you.
You've heard way more of that than I have.
Really?
I got a therapist mom, so I did not hear those things.
That's right.
It's a life hack to have a therapist mom. And we also found research or writing by researcher Marcia, I can't ever read those names. Marcia Webb blaming the Christians for the illness can only add to symptomatic inappropriate guilt, which the American Psychiatric Association correlates with depression. So when someone blames you for your illness, or if you blame yourself for your illness, if you're like, I suck, therefore I'm bad, I'm not good enough, I'm not achieving good enough of my faith, like those types of thoughts can lead to like inappropriate guilt, meaning you dislike yourself more because you think that you are incapable of solving the problem. And that is sad because that can lead to spirals of like, well, how am I ever gonna get better? Or maybe my faith doesn't mean anything, maybe I don't mean anything. It can get really dark really fast. And so the guilt that isn't ours causes more problems. Yeah, so what that means, I think, for the average Christian is that if someone comes to you and they're saying, hey, I'm really struggling with overthinking, I'm struggling with anxiety, I'm struggling with PTSD flashbacks or whatever, and you say, oh, but aren't you praying every day? You're causing more depression. That's what the research says, because you're making them internalize and feel more guilty about it. And like, sure, you could offer prayer as a support. You could offer to pray with them. But if your attitude is one of, oh, this is happening to you because you're not praying, because you don't care enough about your faith, then that's going to make them feel guilty about something that they really should not. There's no guilt in that situation. And that can turn into church hurt really quick. Because we know people, I think, who are like this, where if at some point in their life they're really struggling and they went to a Christian friend or a member of the clergy, like their pastor or someone, and they tried to like get the help that they needed, and that person made them feel worse about whatever they were going through, that later translates into, wow, those people really messed me up and God must hate me, or there's no point to God because these people aren't loving or caring and they told me I made it all up, or something like that. Yeah. So it can lead to people like not wanting to go back to church because they feel like they weren't listened to or heard. Yeah. Or like their problem was made worse. Maybe ended up or whatever. So some of the other stigmas we've talked about but some others are that Christian faith should be protection against mental health struggles. That's kind of that idea of, oh, well, if you're praying, if you're reading your Bible, like you're not going to deal with that because God's just going to protect you. And that's not true. And we don't see evidence of that in the Bible. The Bible doesn't say that. No. Another one is that mental illness is caused by a lack of belief or by personal sin. That actually I didn't think of until I just reread it, of if you are struggling with depression or anxiety, people like Christians might accuse you of sin. They might either say, oh, well, you are supposed to be trusting God, so your anxiety is sin. I've heard that one.
Or they might be like, oh, God is punishing you with this feeling of depression because you're in a habit of sin.
The question's not conviction.
No.
The question's not conviction.
What's that verse about? Godly sorrow leads to like repentance.
Or wisdom, maybe.
But then, but like guilt and depression, like I can't remember.
We'll put that in the show. We'll put it up on the screen.
Let me find it.
We can put it up on the screen later, though. We don't need to find it now. The power of editing will fix our addled brains.
In the last stigma thing that I want to talk about, which this one's really complicated, and I don't think it's black and white.
Oh.
But that mental illness is always a symptom of spiritual warfare or demonic possession. But you're getting complicated. These things could be correlated, but I would say it's absolutely false that they're always would be
too far, and also like it shouldn't be your first go to. Like if you find someone, because we both know people who feel like they've seen a demonic presence be removed or just been in the presence of a demonic presence, and that should be its own episode probably. But in those stories, there is always a difference between like if you meet someone who's sad, don't immediately go, you're possessed, aren't you? Like no, maybe they're just sad. Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe something really bad happened and they don't know how to talk about it. That's not the same thing as.
And that could scare them more. Like that's another example of a response that you could have that could make it worse. For someone.
Yeah, it's just not what you want to jump to immediately. Right. All sadness is caused by the devil. It's kind of like that verse in James that I love so much, where it's like God doesn't tempt anyone, but every man is dragged out by his own evil desires and enticed.
Right.
You can put mental illness can be like things are happening inside of us.
Yeah.
External of the devil.
Right.
So that is just it's inside of us for other reasons. Something happened. We had something negative happen. We had a conversation. We experienced some trauma, and that caused something internally to break. And we need the Lord to help us fix it, but it doesn't mean we're possessed by a demon.
No, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's spiritual warfare.
No, it could be the result of like social, emotional, physical warfare.
Yes, it's the result of sin in the world. It's a result of the fact that we live in a broken,
but not sin inside of you. It's different. That exists in a different context. See, it's complicated. Basically, this is an out-of-pocket example, but if someone beats you up because they're mad at you, and you get really sad about that, that's not a spiritual problem. Someone beats you up, and you're sad because you were physically hurt, and you're probably in pain because you were physically hurt. That has nothing to do with your spiritual.
I mean, maybe if you really wanted to, you could say a demon possessed them, but that would.
But then someone possessed the other person.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But
your sadness is tied to the physical thing that happened to you.
Responsibility for people.
We are all dragged out by our own evil desires and enticed. And being sad is not an evil desire.
The question's not a sin. Anxiety is not a sin. OCD is not a sin. PTSD is not a sin. Schizophrenia is not a sin. Autism is not a sin. Because it is a mental illness. But, Okay, so we're going to talk about why this matters to each of us individually.
The fun part.
So before we get to our personal things, which I really didn't prepare, so I don't know what's going to
it specifically says in the notes, not scripted.
Yeah, so I don't know. But before we get to personal stories, just from a Christian perspective, I think that Christians should be the best at handling mental illness because we believe in the God who created us and created our minds and created our bodies. So he is the one who can help us work through things, who can heal them. And also because our faith is built on hope. It's built on restoration, but that also comes through pain. Kind of the Good Friday to the the Saturday.
I don't know, do they?
I don't know. Sad Saturday, Easter Sunday. That's our faith, and so I think we should be able to know how to minister to people and how to deal with it in our own lives of the really low lows, and then coming to a baseline and rejoicing.
And we might have to talk about it in more detail later, but part of the fruits of the Spirit are like self-control, and that part of like sometimes healing through mental illness can be learning self-control.
Yeah.
And so that means if you're pursuing Jesus as part of your faith, you will be pursuing and growing in self-control, because sanctification is a process, not an immediate.
And so is healing.
So as we become more like Jesus and we grow in the fruits of the Spirit, we get better at those things.
Right. So about the Christians being the most welcoming, historically Christian spaces were the only places where those experiencing mental health crisis were welcome. The oldest psychiatric hospital in the world, the Bethlehem Royal, was founded in 1247 in London by monks. But then by the 20th century, with the rise of psychology and psychiatry, which we talked about Christian skepticism earlier, that kind of emphasis for Christians was lost, and now we're not really associated with caring for the mentally ill. I don't think.
No, I don't think so.
But we want to be.
We do.
We want to be.
Sorry, my brain started thinking about silence for a second. I got really sidetracked.
No, I know. I also got distracted because, like, obviously, a lot of the old mental hospitals were really problematic.
Not because of necessarily faith reasons, but sometimes.
I think mostly not.
Mostly not. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a societal thing.
Let's talk about
rock, paper, scissors. The loser goes first. Oh, yeah, we have to. Oh, wait. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Me. I have to go first. I was hoping to win. That's okay. Mental illness. I've got it.
We know her.
She's not my best friend. No, that's too far. I've struggled with mental illness since I was like 8.
Yeah.
Which means that's like 20 years. Not always at the same level, which is
21.
True, almost 22. But not at the same level. So one of the things that first just came to my mind when thinking about is you don't, hopefully, and I haven't experienced the same level of mental illness your entire life. If you do, then you have a really serious problem. But there have been periods of my life where I was like, wow, I am down and out and this is terrible. And then through the process of like healing and growth and therapy and like all these other things, we brought that up to being like, I feel pretty good. And then sometimes something happens or I don't feel great anymore. But because of all those things, it is a journey and there are ups and downs, and that doesn't. It just things happen and things can bring you backwards in time. And you think, oh, I fixed this problem, and then you realize I missed something, and you have to go back. And God in my life has directed like all of that, where I've been like, Lord, help me with this, and He's like, well, we have to start 15 years ago, and it's like, oh no.
You say the Holy Spirit's your counselor.
Well, true that, but it's a long story. So in a nutshell, I grew up in a home that had elements, we'll say, of domestic abuse. And so that meant that by the time I was like 11, because some of those things really came in force when I was 7 and 8. So by the time I was 11, it was real bad. And I was depressed, suicidal. I had an anger problem.
Is that mental illness?
Inability to control your anger, I think so. It felt like one.
Yeah.
It makes you sad. It makes you like for me, like being angry all the time is like exhausting.
Yeah.
If you're walking around like full with anger, that kind of gets tiring. And also it can damage yourself and your self concept. Like I viewed myself as an angry person, and I had stopped viewing myself as an angry person until I was in my 20s, probably. So it messes with your identity. So I think that like is a huge part of mental illness. But so all those things meant that when I was 13, my mom was like, I'm done with you, you little rage monster, maniac man. You need to go to therapy or fix these problems. And I had been to some biblical counseling, and it wasn't unhelpful, but um, I think those pastors who were awesome, I still remember them, Pastor Sale, Pastor Dennis, they they put a lot into me that helped me get started and that put me on the right direction. And then when I finally started therapy, it didn't work. It didn't. I hated that guy. I didn't like him. He didn't like the fact that I was homeschooled. He thought I was dumb. He talked to me like I was dumb, and he didn't realize that I was not dumb. And it really bothered me that he talked down to me all the time. Because I was 13. And like, yeah, I was isolated and I was homeschooled and I didn't have great social skills. That was all true. I wasn't wrong about those things. I wasn't dumb.
Yeah, and like don't condescend to your client.
And so it just didn't work. He once told me he couldn't help me deal with my anger unless he saw me angry, which is that's nonsense.
That's ridiculous.
It's like, what do you want me to do? Freak out and attack you? In the moment, I think he was trying to get me to. I think he was actually trying to like provoke me. She's not a good therapist. Like, don't provoke the rage child. I don't know.
I mean, that's like telling a veteran, "Oh, I can't help you with your PTSD. I'm going to shoot you in warfare."
Yeah, somebody used to shoot at you
like,
for you. That was real.
No.
Yeah, so that didn't work. My mom made me go. I think it was 6 months. So I had to go. Like, I went for 6 months. I think every week or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember how often. For like 6 months, and then I was like, "It's not working. Can we please stop?" And so she said, "Yeah," because she could tell it wasn't working, and there's a lot going on in life. And I started high school, and then when I was 15, my parents got divorced, and I asked my mom to go back to therapy. I don't know why. I think I was like, "This is not going to go well for me.
Yeah.
This divorce. This is going to go very poorly. I should seek help," because I knew my parents were not going to have an easy divorce. And I knew that that would put me in the middle because I was still, custody was up for grabs. My sister was old enough where custody didn't matter. She was already 18, but I wasn't, and I knew they were going to be fighting over me. And I was like, I'm going to
hot commodity.
Apparently, but I think I just knew something in me knew I was like, I'm going to need assistance here. And so it was actually. I don't have time to go into all those details. I think it was because I was in a Christian high school and I was learning to pray and I was very stressed about my own emotions and wanting to heal and wanting God to help me. And I think God did help me by putting those therapists in my life. And then I went to therapy for all of high school and a little bit after high school, and I took a break. And then I ended up in therapy again in like 2018. And then that helped me put my head on straight for a bit. And then I took a break, and then I went back again in 2022 because I had a PTSD like regression. Like I had an episode of post traumatic stress, and then I've been good for a bit since. That we did therapy again for like another year, and then now currently I'm not in therapy, but
Nice.
It's been a journey, and all of that really stemmed from like things that happened in childhood and then things that happened later. Because the annoying thing is that sometimes you're like always looking in the past for the causes of your mental illness or like your depression or your anxiety or like whatever. Like you're always looking backwards, and sometimes it's the stuff that actually happened like 2 weeks ago. It's not always like, oh, that thing from 5 years ago, that must be it. It's like, no, actually, you went through something recently, and that's aggravating all old stuff and causing these
Yeah, it
things.
can be both. It can like, trigger old things.
That's also part of the reason why it matters to me is as a youth leader, I have had so many students who have come to me and told me things. I'm like, well, now I have to tell your parents, and now I have to make sure you get some help. And so I've had friends who have not been as successful with their healing as I've been, and that also
regarding therapy or regarding the church?
Both. But like they either didn't pursue therapy for a long time or they haven't pursued therapy or whatever, and it just makes me feel like advocacy is important because there is a stigma and b a lot of misunderstandings about what therapy is. Therapy is not just talking; it's so much more than just talking.
Yeah.
About your problems. It's why if you like have a friend and you're like, oh, I just talked to my friend, that's my therapy. Not the same thing. But that's probably it in a nutshell.
Do you feel like
going into like an hour long retelling?
Do you feel like the church / your faith, what any of those things mean to you, were helpful? Do you feel like they ever were harmful or made it confusing?
I mean, I think I got really lucky that like Pastor Dennis, when he was an elder Sal, a weird way to that's what he was though. They were doing their best, and they just wanted me to know that God loved me and that God could help me. And my secular therapist was just really respectful of the fact that I was a Christian. Because I would tell her like, I don't really want to like go that route, or this is a problem for me specifically because of my faith. I want you to help me with it.
Yeah.
And because she was good at her job, even if she thought I was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, she didn't ever say that to me. She went, okay, let's figure it out then. If that's what you want and that's what you're feeling, let's do that. And so I think I might have not even lucky. I think I was blessed that God put really in. She ended up being Christian. I didn't even know that. My secular therapist was a Christian the entire time. And I just didn't know until it was like 4 or 5 years in, maybe 3, like somewhere in there. I was like, oh, wait, you go to church? Like she just never talks about it. So I think sometimes too, the people who just because they don't put biblical counselor in the title doesn't mean that they're not Christians.
Right.
You know, my mom is an example of that. My mom is not a Christian counselor, but she is a Christian who does therapy.
Yeah.
She's a Christian who can do DBT and CBT and knows all these other things and like she knows everything about everything.
Yeah.
Is what it feels like when you talk to her. She's pretty knowledgeable, but she doesn't bill herself as a Christian therapist. That's it in a nutshell. That's me. Domestic abuse, very sad, very terrible. Messed me up.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I don't know. We're getting so